Welcome to Underline This podcast, the podcast where we unpack the big ideas hiding in the margins. Because the best parts, they're between the lines. We have the best episode that we've ever done coming up today. I would encourage you to go ahead and subscribe to the blog in the description below, where you can read a transcript of today's discussion. Recently, I've had a fever for Cormac McCarthy's writing. In 3 weeks, I've read Blood Meridian, No Country for Old Men, and the one I finished last night at 12:48 a.m. on a Saturday was The Road. One more of the few books that I can sit down and read in one sitting, and that is The Road. Basically, every book except for Blood Meridian of Cormac McCarthy's, I've been able to sit down and just pump out really quickly. I've read this book multiple times. I've watched the movie, and it's an emotional book. I'll start with some background on the author, give a summary of the book, break down key themes, theories of the different allegories that people have put together based on the book. And we'll talk about a comparison between the book as well as the movie and finish with my personal takeaways. So let's kick things off. Some of this might be a little redundant if you listen to other episodes, but I really do think it's important to give the author its due so we can have a better understanding of their influences and their life and see how it comes out in their writing. Let's talk about Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy was born in 1933 in Providence, Rhode Island, but spent most of his earlier life in Tennessee. He is a well-accomplished American author and playwright who specialized in Southern Gothic, Western, and post-apocalyptic genres. He's widely regarded as one of the greatest writers of the 20th and 21st century. He went to the University of Tennessee, but didn't graduate because he decided to focus his time exclusively on writing, which I would say has paid off well for him. A lot of great authors, as I mentioned before, it's interesting to learn their influences and the environment around them. Like grapes undergoing a process of terroir and being able to taste the unique flavor of wine they give, the same goes for authors and their writing. I've written a blog about the process of terroir as a metaphor for people that you can read in the blog, found in the description. Now, if McCarthy's ideas and talents are grapes, his literature is the wine it produces. The influences around him, authors, and environment that he grew up in act like mint, vegetation, and elevation that give a rich fusion of flavor to wine from grapes. Now let's unpack those elements now. I've mentioned this in the past two podcasts with McCarthy in Blood Meridian and in No Country for Old Men, but some of the bigger philosophers that had a really big impact on McCarthy's life, just in his interest, are Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. Schopenhauer promoted philosophies regarding a godless universe, predetermination, and pessimism. You definitely find that in the three books that I've covered on this podcast so far. And then he also has a lot of themes from Nietzsche, and these are around moral relativism and will to power. You can see these philosophical themes quite peppered a lot in his writing. Now, some of the literary influences for McCarthy include Ernest Hemingway, Southern Gothic writers such as William Faulkner, who he once described as one of the greatest authors of the last century, and James Joyce. Now, traces of Faulkner and Joyce found in McCarthy's writings are found in the use of his long sentences, modern techniques, minimal punctuations, mythic tones, morally ambiguous characters, and themes centered around emotional burdens such as guilt and trauma from the past. McCarthy's writings has a lot of shared elements with the King James Bible, not because of the role of religion in his life, but for its language, its patterns, its style, and rhythm. And there's similar dictation, sentence structure, and buildup of mythic and epic characters and moments found in McCarthy's books. Now, some of the overlapping themes found in McCarthy's novels and the King James Bible include the apocalypse, but of course, different interpretations of what that is, violence, redemption, and judgment. Other authors that have been key influences for McCarthy include Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, and Joseph Conrad, author of Heart of Darkness. And you can see the overlap between these influences and McCarthy's writing, both in the use of the existential questions that are raised in these scenarios and in their stories, the human savagery and dark themes. And you'll see similar characters, for example, in Melville's Moby Dick, the character Captain Ahab, and in Blood Meridian by McCarthy, Judge Holden are very similar. They're both antagonists that raise philosophical questions. And Joseph Conrad's most famous novel, Heart of Darkness, highlights the darkness and capacity for evil that man inflicts on each other. Now, the last major influence, which I've also mentioned this before, so please forgive the redundancy again. I think it's important, especially if you never heard this before. But in McCarthy's writings, there is a lot of influence that he pulls from American frontier mythology, specifically the Indian wars with the Comanches, the Mexican-American War, and the violent chaos of frontier life. Now, McCarthy published his first novel, The Orchard Keeper, in 1965, and would continue to release famous works such as Blood Meridian, All the Pretty Horses, No Country for Old Men, and The Road. He was famous, very famous, for being reclusive and rarely making appearances for interviews. I think there's only one that you can find on YouTube, but I've got to double check that. But he is hard to find. And he lived the majority of his life in El Paso, Texas, and eventually New Mexico. Now, a shocking detail about McCarthy is, despite his fame and achievements, he spent his early career in severe poverty. Now, specific to The Road, McCarthy was inspired to write this novel because of a trip he took with his youngest son. And the character of this boy from The Road is modeled after him. The story itself has been said to be like a personal allegory for McCarthy, where the father's fear of death is McCarthy reconciling his own mortality and relationship with his son, specifically about that time when he will die, McCarthy, or the father. And the allegorical meaning behind The Road, from this lens, is the worry that parents have about the world they will leave for their own children. So shout out to parents out there who are being amazing role models, mentors, and providers to their children so they can pass the torch on to them. One of the most lasting and noble legacies, going off script here, someone can give, in my opinion, is raising children who will make the world better than they found it. That being said, I think this story resonates strongly with parents who have experienced the joys and pains of parenting. And on June 13th, 2023, at age 89, McCarthy passed away, leaving behind a rich literary legacy. Now we're going to pivot. We're going to talk about a summary of the book, The Road. The Road follows a father and young son traveling in post-apocalyptic United States. We never know what the cause of this war ever was. We just get clues, and we know that the landscape is covered in ash. The sun is dim, vegetation is almost non-existent, there are no animals, except for one creature that we hear about at the beginning, and most humans, out of desperation, have turned to extreme violence and cannibalism. On their journey, the father and the son push a shopping cart filled with their limited possessions. Their goal is to head south toward the coast in search of warmer weather and greater chances of survival. This story is bleak, and our characters are almost always vulnerable to danger. It's a deeply intimate story that alternates between moments of sudden danger, encounters with other survivors on the road, and quiet tenderness between father and son. And the most powerful element of this story is focused on the father trying to teach his son to carry the fire before his health fails him. I will talk more about the profound symbolism of the fire in a moment, but now we're going to talk about key themes. I've used similar metaphors before, so please forgive me, but I'll pull out another one that's very similar. And this book is like eating a very sophisticated dish, like Peruvian ceviche. Chances are you're going to eat a McDonald's meal very differently than you would Peruvian ceviche or even food that comes from a Michelin star restaurant. One is fuel, while the other is more of a experience, although you could argue that it's fuel as well. But the difference being that at McDonald's, the food's quickly prepared, thus the name and label, fast food. But with a Michelin star or even making Peruvian ceviche, there's more effort, attention to detail, and an experience that you'll appreciate if you take the time to really enjoy it and savor it and think about what it is that you're eating, because there's going to be some unique flavor, like with this book. Not to say you can't do the same thing with a McDonald's meal. I'm someone that appreciates a good meal, a good hamburger from there, but one came from an artist while the other came from an industrial machine, probably managed by a teenager. Now, with that disclaimer in mind, let's dive into key themes. First, parental love and sacrifice. The father's purpose His divine calling, which he mentions several times as being his responsibility from God, is to keep his son alive. He's completely devoted to protecting the boy. He takes no risks in the book and doesn't show mercy to those who threaten him or his son. While you read this book, just notice the innocence and purity of the boy in contrast to the darkness all around him. He is a diamond in the rough, the light in the darkness, the child in a corrupted world. Next, morality in a world that has none. As mentioned before, this story takes place after a major collapse in society and in the natural world. Ash, death, and destruction are everywhere. Desperation breeds selfishness, violence, and the absolute worst bruteness that man can give. Bands of thieves, cannibals, liars, and rapists roam like predators in search of prey. Despite the dark hopelessness mood, the father and son self-impose themselves as the good guys who constantly remind themselves that they are carrying the fire. They have morals and refuse to become like the bad guys. For example, not eating other people, not attacking other people who are innocent. Now, I will unpack the symbolism behind this idea of carrying the fire, but as a preview to make a point, I will say that the fire has been interpreted in many ways to mean divine potential. Now, juxtapose the bad guys from the father and son. Bad guys, again, these are brutes, quite literally. Those that have degraded to a barbaric animal kingdom-like state that only care about satisfying basic needs, while the other recognizes a fall from grace and intends to protect their goodness. The father at times doesn't show compassion or mercy, but the boy does. And it's up to the reader to really decide who's right and who's wrong. If you're familiar with The Last of Us, this feels similar in that characters have to make difficult ethical decisions that determine their survival. Hope and resilience. Another interpretation for that flame that they refer to when they say, "Are you carrying the fire?" is that the boy and father keep on bringing up is that this carrying the fire is hope. Flames are shapeless and hope is very similar. In the scope of the book, hope could be living, it could be human decency, or something as simple as just finding better circumstances. Mortality and legacy. One of the reasons why this book is so emotional is that the father knows he's not going to survive long. We know that right from the get-go, and danger's all around them. His dialogue with his son throughout the book is one of imparting wisdom and lessons to the boy so that when the time does come that he dies, he'll be independent enough and ready to carry on the fire without him. The last thing I'll unpack is the fall and fragility of civilization. Total societal and ecological collapse in the book shows just how quickly humanity will degrade itself to primal survival. The bad guys seem to be everywhere, and nobody is spared. The father and son come across cannibals, scavengers, and slavers. This is a really dark book. They discover live humans at one point being stored like meat in a basement. They see horrific violence, and they narrowly escape being victims to these bad guys time and time again. Now that we set the stage with context for the story, we've talked about Cormac McCarthy, we've gone through the different themes, we're going to go a level deeper. So let's do a little bit of spelunking as we unpack the allegories found within the road. And there are a lot. Now, I would say with allegories, they're almost like a Rorschach test where, and if you don't know what that is, those are those ink blot images that psychologists will look at, and it's up to the patient to look at that and to say what they see when they look at those random blots of ink. Allegories are a very similar way. What I see might be very different from what you see. My interpretation might be different from your interpretation. And earlier, I gave a metaphor relating reading to enjoying fine quality food. So again, this is another reminder. When you give time to appreciate what you're consuming, you'll have a special experience. With this book, I strongly recommend taking the time to appreciate it and take time to digest it. So one of the takeaways I've enjoyed from reading McCarthy is trying to ascertain what allegories can be found in these different stories. And this one has a lot. I did some research on the side and made my own, and there really is no right or wrong answer, but here's what I found. So let's break these down. First is this is a religious allegory. Evidence to support this is the symbolism of the fire. The boy represents that Christ-like figure and he's living in a fallen world. The father and boy always have to remind themselves that we're carrying the fire. And a common allegorical reading I've seen in discussions online is that the fire represents divine light, purity, innocence, or even the Holy Spirit. Christianity uses fire commonly in the scriptures and burning as the power of the Holy Ghost and its purifying influence. And I mentioned before that the boy shares strong qualities of a Christ-like figure, and it really is in his innocence that is guiding the father to protect him. And on several occasions, the father, as I mentioned before, declares that he's chosen by God to protect the boy, suggesting that there's some divinity surrounding them. He says, if he is not the word of God, God never spoke. Additional supporting evidence of the boy's Christ-like attributes is when he pleads on behalf of the wayward characters they meet on the road. At one point, there's an old blind man who lies about his age, and he's just a wanderer because that's all he knows how to do at this point. When he's blind, he does see the boy and doesn't believe that the boy is real. In fact, he believes it's an angel. And even as I'm talking about this, I'm getting goosebumps. But when they meet him, the boy pleads that they share their rations and rest with him. And the father does. And later on in the story, the boy and father are exploring a boat. And when they swim back to shore, they discover their shopping cart with everything they own, including the clothes that were on their back that they took off to go swimming, is gone. It's been stolen. They find tracks in the sand, and they quickly subdue the thief. When they catch up to him, it's very clear that his appearance is pretty rugged, which I guess they all are. But the way that the book describes the thief is he's scarred. He's missing fingers from what we assume were cut by cannibals. And he's wearing moldy rags, and he has plastic that's wrapped around his feet that's been turned into shoes. And at gunpoint, he gives everything back, but then father inflicts an eye for an eye justice by telling the man to give him not just their things back, but everything that he owns, including his clothing. The thief and the boy both plead for the father to show mercy, but he shows no remorse in that this is justice. This is eye for an eye. In Christianity, Christ is seen as the mediator with the Father for our sins. He pleads with the Father to show mercy when justice needs to be done. Powerful, powerful takeaway in this moment, especially with the thief, the little boy, and the father, is that despite knowing the thief left them with nothing, now that the shoe is on the other foot, I think that I do think that the father should have shown mercy, which I know again goes against logic here that, well, he stole all of your things, leaving you to die. So I think it's only fair that he does that to you. And I think that's intentional by McCarthy. And that's why this allegory is so powerful, is that it's so relatable to Christianity that, that's when we're all in the shoes of the thief, we want mercy to be shown on us. And I think that's what Cormac McCarthy is doing here by creating this scene. So last supporting evidence that this is a religious allegory is that this is a fallen world. We don't know how it was destroyed, but we do know it's barely inhabitable. This state of being is like the fallen state of Eden, or even the mortal world that Adam and Eve enter after being banished from the garden. Like Adam and Eve, the father and son are the last bearers who carry that fire of an old world into a fallen one. And if you remember, the reason why Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden is because that's where they were with God. They were in God's presence, and they lived in a paradise state, almost very similar to the father before the fallen world. He lived in what would be interpreted as paradise based on where they live now. Next allegory, parental love. The road as an allegory for parenthood. This book is extremely relatable with its themes of parental love and parenthood as being a divine mission. The father says many times and in many ways, my job is to take care of you, referring to the boy. I was appointed to that by God. It's the duty of every parent to protect, nourish, and teach their children. And the child in this story is innocent. He's compassionate and hopeful. It's because of his goodness that the father has to protect and educate him against the evils of this fallen world. And despite the differences to the real world and the story, that divine right exists outside the story, that we're meant to protect children and help them carry the fire when we leave. Mortality. This is a fallen and dangerous world that the father and son are living in. They're in constant danger and reminded of death everywhere they go. It's in this vulnerable state that they're reminded of their mortality and really the fragility of their existence. The father is growing weaker, he's coughing up blood, and reminded daily that death is inescapable. This decline represents mortality. The journey towards the sea is a reminder that life, and not to sound pessimistic, is a march towards death. And the legacy we leave is the only thing that remains. That legacy that the father leaves to his son is that fire, that goodness, knowledge, and values that the boy will carry on from his father after he's gone. Civilization's fragility. There are a lot of creative interpretations and predictions of what civilization would look like if there was a complete collapse. Reading this, I was reminded by movies and books such as Book of Eli, Mad Max, I Am Legend, The Walking Dead, and A Quiet Place. Reason being, these are worlds that exist in chaos. The survivors become scavengers, and without the social contract in place, social contract referring to peaceful coexistence and collaboration and coordination, morality is almost non-existent, and cannibalism becomes rampant. Quite literally, mankind has shifted to become more like the animal kingdom, which I mentioned before, where strength preys on the weak, and it's unrecognizable to the old world. However, at times, the old world and the new become blurred. The father recalls memories of places they passed by and introduces the boy to some of the joys of normal life. For example, at one point they go swimming for fun. They have a shopping cart that the father will give the boy rides in, and on a special occasion, they find a can of Coca-Cola that they share. And it's in these moments of normalcy and play that they escape from the harshness of reality, which I think is beautiful. A highlight where we can read between the lines here and relate to this ourselves is this. When you're in the dark, seek out little moments of beauty as an escape. I've written an amazing 5-star blog about this. I'll share in the description. I guess if you go to the description, go to the blog, and you read the transcript of this, I've actually included a hyperlink to Savoring the Beautiful Moments in Life, which again, not to toot my own horn, is pretty well written. But these moments of beauty I found don't have to be grandiose. They don't have to be going to Europe, although that is pretty sweet. It's often the most powerful moments are the small, simple ones, such as enjoying a swim, a walk in the sunshine, or taking a moment to appreciate an ice cold Coca-Cola while the world is falling apart around you. And this is excellent parenting on behalf of I'm the armchair parent here, and I'm not a parent, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But when I read this, I see an excellent parent. As the father finds opportunities to bring his son happiness where he can, I think that is worth applauding. He's carrying the fire, and the father doesn't allow himself or the boy to succumb to despair, although it'd be so easy to. They push forward with hope. The meaning behind carrying the fire is really like staring at a Rorschach test. Again, what I mentioned that before. So it's in these moments that we try and find meaning and joy. And I think that's incredible that he's able to find good despite the absence of order. And we'll talk about next, environmental destruction. So environmental destruction. The father and the boy are living in a corrupted and toxic world. They're probably going to be sick of me saying that. For every time that I've said that, if you had a nickel, you leave this podcast with probably $1. But throughout the book, McCarthy describes the world using the most depressing imagery. The sky is dark and gray, and there's lots and lots of ash. It seems like it's always just falling from the sky. It's on their clothes. It's frosted on the land, and even noticeable in the characters' lungs. There isn't an exact number I was able to find online for how many times McCarthy uses the word ash, but I did see that it is used over 150 times. And that's not by accident. It's intentional. It represents a reminder of the ruin, the death, and residue from the old world. And nature is dying all around them. In the book, there's a point where they hear a loud noise and a waterfall is just created sporadically due to what I interpret as a flash flood. Trees are always falling over around them, and there's an unnatural creature in the beginning that's drinking from a lake, and it doesn't sound natural or recognizable from the old world. Again, I think that's intentional by McCarthy. He's not saying, oh yeah, there was a deer or there's a wolf. He uses creature. So that just shows that whatever is around now is unrecognizable from the old world. Now, McCarthy only gives hints as to what caused this environmental disaster. For example, in one passage he says, and I quote, "The clock stopped at 1:17. There was a long share of light and then a series of low concussions. Based on what we know, we can put this together and safely assume this environmental collapse was probably caused by nuclear bombs. If we look at the bombing of Hiroshima, the thermal radiation obliterated vegetation, blast waves knocked down trees and created rubble, firestorms released radioactive soot into the sky, and radiation poisoning from black rain essentially erased life away with contamination. The father and the boy seemed to live in this kind of world that was bombed and contaminated. The father is coughing up blood. There's one mention of an unrecognizable creature roaming the landscape, and life is just really choking all around them. Next, existential struggle. There are a lot of iceberg-style moments of nihilism and meaninglessness. And in the Underline This podcast episode, found in The Old Man and the Sea, listen to it now, I discuss in Hemingway's writing that he uses surface-level writing that clearly has deeper and profound ideas behind it, which is called iceberg theory, or the iceberg style. Because an iceberg, you're only seeing just the tip, right? That's the expression, the tip of the iceberg. And the father and the boy have found meaning and purpose by carrying the fire. But the question of God's existence in the New World is one of doubt. And a chilling line that I found says, "There is no God, and we are his prophets." Reading between the lines, this essentially is saying that God doesn't exist. And the survivors that roam the world, us, we are walking proof of that. But it is up to the characters to create meaning from a meaningless world. The father finds hope and meaning through his care for the boy and his innocence. The fire in this allegory of an existential struggle is finding meaning in what we see in the flames. The father sees hope that this boy and the goodness within him will live on, and that's what fuels his fire. The powerful message to be found here is that humans must choose hope, even in absurdity, finding meaning and clarity to drive you towards a greater purpose. And that reminds me of a quote from one of McCarthy's greatest influences, which is Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Now, there's some real-world application for all of us there, and clearly it's demonstrated in the road. Now, let's discuss the movie and the book. There's a film that came out in 2009 starring Viggo Mortensen, who plays Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, for those of you that are movie buffs, and it's directed by John Hillcoat. The film stays true to the book in its visually grim atmosphere and imagery. The dialogue is easier to distinguish in the film since McCarthy's writing is notorious for its minimalism. But what does that mean? It means that there's no quotations, no attribution to who says what, and there are fragmented sentences. The world building is consistent in both the film and the movie, in that there's a lot of ambiguity about what caused this apocalypse. Now, where the movie fills in the gaps of the book is that it's able to control the visual narrative. Specifically, when juxtaposing the old versus new worlds, the old world is colorful, warm, and full of rich lighting, while the new one, I get confused with those two worlds, looks like it is expired. The character depth I've found is also a little bit more rich in the film, but it has to be, or it has the opportunity to be, since a good portion of the book is just inner dialogue and memories from the point of view of the father, which is the same in the film, but of course they're able to show that firsthand rather than just hearing his thoughts. And I had a much more emotional response with the book than I did with the movie, but I did get goosebumps in the film whenever the father and the son mention carrying the fire, and then they do like a chest bump similar to the one on Wolf of Wall Street with their fists. Now, overall, the film is a faithful adaptation and it's worth watching, but I don't think it's an Academy Award-winning film. Between the film and the book is so superior. I only recommend the film because I think it's a worthy adaptation and helps the reader really have a better understanding of the book, especially if you're someone that's getting used to reading Cormac McCarthy, because it is written in a minimalistic style. All right, now we're going to come to a close here with my personal takeaways. My takeaways from the road came in the form of reminders. First reminder is that love, hope, and a strong purpose can be a fire in the darkness. We can carry that fire. Second, how we face ruin matters more than asking, "Oh, why me?" And I'm reminded by the film, The Count of Monte Cristo, when I was reading through this and I had this idea of that, when this reminder struck me, I was reminded by a powerful scene in the film, The Count of Monte Cristo, not the new one, the older one, when there's a birthday speech being given about facing the adversities in life. And in the blog, I've actually included a link to it, but I'll just read from it here. And that is when the Count of Monte Cristo is giving a speech, he says, "Life is a storm, my young friend. You will bask in the sunlight one moment and be shattered on the rocks in the next. What makes you a man is what you do when that storm comes. You must look into that storm and shadow as you did in Rome. Do your worst, for I will do mine. Then the fates will know you as we know you, as Albert Mondigo, the man." Third reminder, values can be an anchor or a floaty. When we genuinely choose to live up to our values and standards, making a moral choice is something that just comes naturally. We're wired, we're grounded by it. It keeps us from becoming a floaty, which is swept away by the currents if we don't live it. And when we are chased, or when we're approached with making a moral choice, it becomes a passive thing as a floaty, and we're at the mercy of the current, and we don't want that. Fourth and final takeaway is this: legacy is the fire we can carry and pass on to the next generations. So, what will our legacy be? Achievements, money, chasing pleasures, all of that can be taken away. Let's not forget to carry the fire. Face adversity with courage. Oh, let me actually take a couple steps back, get ahead of myself. So, talking about the legacy, I mentioned if we pursue achievements, money, chasing pleasures, those are things that will disappear, like smoke when we die. If we focus on those weak legacies, we're not going to leave anything behind. We're not going to make the world a better place. But if we choose to fuel that fire with something strong of value, like principles, courage, mentorship, and selflessness, and we impart these on our children, then we'll leave the world better than we found it. So in conclusion, let's not forget to carry the fire. Let's face adversity with courage. And last of all, don't forget to call your parents. And if you're a parent, don't forget to call your child. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And if you want wisdom that sticks, follow this blog and Underline This podcast on YouTube and social media for short, impactful articles and videos that get straight to the point. Plus, explore curated tools, books, and resources on my recommendations page. I have a list of all my favorite books, everything that's brought real value to me, shared, so I can do the same for you. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.